Wings of Defiance. The summer of 1941 brought fire and steel to the Soviet Union. As German forces carved deep into Soviet territory, Marina Raskova sat in a sparse Moscow office, her jaw set with determination that matched the steel of the aircraft she once flew. Outside, the city prepared for siege, but inside, a different kind of revolution was brewing. "They say women cannot fly in combat," General Osipenko stated, his weathered face betraying neither approval nor dismissal. Before him sat three proposals, each more audacious than the last. Marina leaned forward, her dark eyes unwavering. "Then they have not met Soviet women, Comrade General. We have already proven ourselves as pilots, navigators, and engineers. Now we must prove ourselves in battle." The general studied the famous aviator before him. Marina Raskova was a national hero, holder of multiple records, her face known to every Soviet citizen. If anyone could forge women into a fighting force, it would be her. 3 regiments, she continued. Fighter pilots, dive bombers, and night bombers. Give me 6 months, and I will give you squadrons that will make the fascists weep. By October, hundreds of young women converged on Engels, a small town on the Volga River. They came from universities and factories, from collective farms and city apartments. Some had flying experience, others had never seen an aircraft up close. What united them was fury at the invasion of their homeland and an unshakable determination to fight. Nadia Popova arrived with nothing but a small bag and dreams of vengeance. The Germans had destroyed her village, scattered her family. At 19, she stood barely 5 feet tall, but her eyes burned with purpose. "I will make them pay," she whispered to herself, watching the ancient Polikarpov P-2 biplanes lined up on the airfield. These planes were relics, designed for crop dusting and training, not combat. Built of plywood and canvas, they could barely reach 94 miles per hour. They had no radios, no guns except what could be mounted, no parachutes, no radar. In the modern war of 1941, they seemed absurdly inadequate. But Marina saw their potential. "Speed is not everything," she told her assembled pilots on that first cold morning. "These planes are slow, yes, but they are also silent. They can glide with their engines off. They can fly low, beneath radar. What the fascists have in technology, we will match with courage and cunning." The training was brutal. Winter descended on the Volga with savage fury, but the women flew through snow and darkness, learning to navigate by stars alone, learning to drop their small bombs with precision, learning to survive when everything went wrong. Valentina Gryzodobova, assigned as a navigator, struggled initially with the calculations required in the freezing cockpit. Her fingers would go numb within minutes, making it nearly impossible to mark positions on her map. She developed a system using thick gloves and memorization, teaching others her techniques. Not all would make it through training. Some washed out, unable to handle the physical demands. Others were reassigned to different duties. But those who remained formed bonds stronger than steel. They became sisters in the truest sense, trusting each other with their lives every night. By spring 1942, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment was ready. Marina stood before her pilots, now seasoned by months of relentless preparation. They wore uniforms designed for men, boots stuffed with paper to fit their smaller feet, helmets that slipped over their eyes. "The Germans call their forces unstoppable," Marina said, her voice carrying across the silent assembly. "Tomorrow night, we will show them they are wrong. Tomorrow night, we hunt." As darkness fell on their first mission, Nadia climbed into her P-2, her navigator Katia settling in behind her. The little plane seemed fragile against the vast Russian night, but in Nadia's hands, it became something else entirely, a weapon of vengeance, silent and deadly. Baptism by fire. The moon hung low over the front lines as 12 P-2 biplanes lifted into the darkness. Nadia's hands gripped the controls, her heart hammering against her ribs. Below, the earth was scarred with trenches and craters, illuminated intermittently by artillery fire. This was no longer training. This was war. German encampment ahead, 2 kilometers, Kadia's voice came from behind, steady despite the buffeting wind that tore through the open cockpit. They wore no headsets. The planes were too primitive for such luxuries. Communication meant shouting over the engine's roar. Nadia could see it now, a cluster of lights marking the enemy position. Supply depot, according to intelligence. Her target. She pulled back on the throttle, letting the engine idle to a whisper. The P-2 began to glide, nearly silent except for the wind rushing through its canvas wings, a sound that would soon become legendary. The German soldiers heard it first, a strange whistling, like wind through trees or a broom sweeping across the sky. They looked up confused. By the time they understood, it was too late. Nadia lined up her approach, hand steady now, fear transformed into focus. Ready, she called back to Kadia, who had her hands on the bomb release. Ready, Kadia confirmed. The earth rushed up to meet them. Nadia could see individual figures scrambling below, hear the first shouts of alarm. Then release. The plane lurched upward as the bombs fell away. Nadia banked hard, restarting the engine, as behind them the night erupted in flame. Secondary explosions followed. Ammunition or fuel, something that burned with white-hot intensity. Direct hit. Kadia screamed in triumph, but there was no time to celebrate. Tracer fire stitched the darkness around them, angry red lines searching for their fragile aircraft. A machine gun position had found them. Nadia Dove, the P-2, responding with the agility that would save their lives countless times. The little plane could turn on a coin, could fly so low that pursuing fighters would crash before catching them. She skimmed the treetops, Kadia calling out obstacles, until they burst clear into open sky. Around them, other planes were making their runs. Marina had devised a brilliant tactic. One plane would draw fire while two others attacked from different angles. The Germans would focus their searchlights and guns on the decoy, while the real threats slipped through unseen. But not everyone made it through that first night. Nadia watched in horror as one P-2, caught in crossed searchlight beams, became a target for concentrated flak. The little plane seemed to hang in the light for an eternal moment before bursting into flames. No parachutes blossomed. There were none to give. Back at base, as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, they counted aircraft. 10 returned. 2 did not. Nadia sat on the wing of her plane, still trembling from adrenaline and grief. She had known those pilots, had trained with them, had shared dreams of victory. Marina moved among her pilots, her face grave but unbowed. They died as heroes, she said simply. They died defending the motherland. We honor them by continuing the fight. That night, they flew again. And the night after that, the routine became brutally familiar. Sleep during the day in whatever shelter they could find, often just holes dug in the ground. Eat what little food was available. Maintain the aircraft with their own hands, patching canvas, checking engines, loading bombs. Then, as darkness fell, climb back into those fragile planes and hunt. The Germans began to realize something unprecedented was happening. Soldiers reported attacks by aircraft that made no sound until they were overhead, that struck with uncanny precision, that seemed to vanish like ghosts. Rumors spread through the Wehrmacht. The Soviets had deployed witches, supernatural beings who flew on broomsticks through the night. The name stuck. Nachtwechseln, night witches. In truth, there was nothing supernatural about what these women accomplished. It was skill, courage, and determination forged in fire. Each night, they flew multiple sorties, 8, 10, sometimes 15 missions in a single night. They learned to navigate without instruments, to find their targets in complete darkness, to survive when survival seemed impossible. Nadia and Kadia became one of the most effective teams in the regiment. They developed an almost telepathic understanding, anticipating each other's moves, trusting absolutely in each other's judgment. On their 20th mission, they destroyed a German command post. On their 30th, they hit an ammunition train. The numbers kept climbing, but the cost climbed too. The sound of terror. By the autumn of 1942, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment had become a legend on both sides of the front. German soldiers, battle-hardened veterans who had marched across Europe, found themselves lying awake at night, dreading the distinctive sound that preceded attacks. It is like a witch's broom sweeping across the sky. One German diary entry read, "Recovered after the war. We hear it and know death is coming, but we cannot see them, cannot stop them. My nerves are completely finished." The Luftwaffe, initially dismissive of the threat posed by obsolete biplanes, began to take notice. Fighter pilots were diverted from other duties to hunt the night witches, but the P-2's slow speed worked in their favor. German fighters, designed for high-speed combat, would stall out trying to match the biplane's sluggish pace. More than one Messerschmitt pilot crashed attempting to shoot down what they considered an easy target. In her tent, sketching by candlelight, Nadia documented their tactics in careful detail. Marina had encouraged all pilots to keep records, to learn from each mission. "We are making history," she said. "But more importantly, we are making precedent. Every lesson we learn might save lives, ours and those who follow." The regiment had evolved into a finely tuned instrument of war. New tactics emerged from necessity and innovation. The conveyor belt system became their signature approach. Planes would attack in continuous waves, giving the enemy no respite. As soon as one plane dropped its bombs and banked away, another would be approaching from a different angle. The Germans would scramble to reposition their anti-aircraft guns, only to be attacked from yet another direction. Yevdokia Bershanskaya, who had taken command of the regiment, understood the psychological dimension of their warfare. The night witches weren't just destroying targets. They were destroying morale. German troops, never certain when the attacks would come, when that dreaded sound would whisper through the darkness, suffered from constant stress and exhaustion. "Let them idle the engines as long as possible," Bershanskaya instructed. "Let the silence build. Fear feeds on uncertainty." But the Germans adapted too. They increased their anti-aircraft batteries, deployed more searchlights, and offered bounties and honors for any pilot who could shoot down a night witch. The Iron Cross, they announced, would be awarded to any pilot who successfully destroyed one of these Soviet aircraft. The stakes had been raised, and with them, the danger. Nadia and Katia experienced this firsthand during a mission over Crimea. They had just released their payload on a fuel depot when searchlights caught them, for beams converging simultaneously. Blinded, Nadia flew purely by instinct, throwing the P-2 into a series of violent maneuvers that would have torn apart a less sturdy aircraft. Flak exploded around them, shrapnel tearing through the canvas wings. Katia felt a burning sensation across her shoulder, but bit back any cry that might distract Nadia. The plane shuddered, and for a moment, Nadia thought they were finished. Then they dropped below the searchlight beams into the blessed darkness. Nadia didn't level out until they were kilometers from the target, her arms shaking from the effort of controlling the damaged plane. "You hit," she called back. "Scratch," Katia replied, though her shoulder burned like fire. The plane. Nadia assessed the controls. The P-2 handled differently, sluggish on one side. "We'll make it home. We always do." They didn't make it home, but barely. As ground crew rushed to examine the damage, they counted over 40 holes in the wings and fuselage. One had passed within centimeters of the fuel tank. Another had grazed Katia's shoulder, leaving a bloody furrow. "You were lucky," the mechanic said, shaking her head. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Katia replied, wincing as a medic cleaned her wound. "Nadia flies like she was born with wings." But luck, good or bad, was always present. That same night, another crew wasn't so fortunate. Their plane was hit during final approach to the target, tumbling from the sky in flames. The entire regiment mourned. Marina visited each crew after such losses, her presence a steadying force. "Remember why we fly," she would say. "Remember what the fascists have done to our land, our people. Every mission we complete is a strike for freedom, for our families, for our future." The missions continued, relentless as the tide. Through winter's ice and summer's heat, through clear nights and storms, the night witches flew. They became experts at reading the land below, at finding their way by rivers and roads, calculating bomb drops in their heads, while frost formed on their goggles and wind tore at their faces. German commanders began requesting transfers away from sectors patrolled by the night witches. The psychological warfare was working. Blood and canvas. Winter 1942 brought the worst flying conditions imaginable. Temperatures plunged to minus 40 degrees. The P-2s, never designed for such extremes, became death traps. Engines refused to start, or worse, died mid-flight. Fuel lines froze. The canvas covering the wings became brittle, tearing easily. And still, the night witches flew. Nadia learned to warm her engine with fires built beneath the aircraft, a dangerous practice that risked setting the entire plane ablaze. She learned to clear ice from the wings by rocking the aircraft violently mid-flight. She learned which gloves provided just enough dexterity without letting her fingers freeze. But some lessons came at a terrible price. Lieutenant Anna Yegorov's plane developed engine trouble during a mission over Novorossiysk. Rather than abort, she pressed onto the target, dropped her bomb successfully, then attempted to nurse the failing aircraft back to friendly lines. Her navigator, Sophia, called out landmarks, trying to guide them home through the darkness. They almost made it. The plane crashed 2 kilometers from base, the impact killing Sophia instantly. Anna survived, but was captured by advancing German forces. The regiment learned of her fate weeks later through intelligence reports. She had been interrogated, tortured, but revealed nothing. Eventually, she escaped and made her way back through enemy lines, but she never flew again. Such stories became common. The life expectancy of a night witch in active combat was measured not in years, but in missions. Those who survived 100 missions were considered veteran beyond measure. Nadia passed that mark in January 1943. The regiment's fame spread beyond the military. Soviet newspapers, hungry for heroes in a war that had cost millions of lives, celebrated these women. Posters appeared in factories and collective farms, showing brave female pilots in their cockpits, bombs falling on German positions. "The night witches defend the motherland," the captions proclaimed. But propaganda couldn't protect them from bullets or exhaustion. The relentless pace of operations took its toll. Pilots flew until they collapsed from fatigue, sometimes falling asleep in their cockpits between missions. The ground crews, themselves working without rest, performed miracles keeping the ancient planes airborne. Yevdokia Nozel, one of the regiment's best mechanics, once kept a plane flying with repairs made from fabric torn from her own uniform. "The plane needed it more than I did," she said with a shrug when Marina tried to commend her. The bond between pilots and ground crew became unbreakable. These women understood they were all part of the same mission, that every role was essential. A navigator was useless without a pilot helpless without a mechanic wasting her efforts without armors to load the bombs. In March 1943, disaster struck. A German fighter squadron, specifically tasked with hunting the night witches, caught a formation of P-2s during a dawn return flight. The biplanes, visible in the growing light and low on fuel, were nearly defenseless. 4 planes went down before Nadia, leading the formation, made a desperate decision. "Everyone dive," she commanded. "Follow me." She dropped toward the forest below, pushing the P-2 to its limits. The German fighters followed, but at these low altitudes, their speed became a liability. Nadia led them through a maze of trees, the P-2's slow speed and tight, turning radius finally giving advantage. One German fighter, unable to pull up in time, crashed into the canopy. But not all her squadron escaped. 2 more planes were shot down before the survivors made it to safety. That evening, Nadia stood before the graves of her fallen comrades, 6 women dead in a single day, and felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like lead. Marina found her there as night fell. "It never gets easier," the legendary pilot said quietly. "The first loss tears your heart. The 10th burns your soul. But we continue because we must. Sometimes I wonder if we're making any difference," Nadia admitted. "We fly, we bomb, but the Germans keep coming." "Look at the reports," Marina replied, handing her a folder. Last month, this regiment flew over 700 sorties. We destroyed 23 supply columns, 17 command posts, and countless other targets. German soldiers are requesting transfers. Their officers are complaining to Berlin about the impossibility of getting rest. We are making a difference, Nadia. Every single night, we make a difference. That night, Nadia flew with renewed purpose. For her fallen comrades, for her country, for the future they were fighting to preserve. The darkness held no terror for her now. She had become the terror. Iron Cross and wooden wings. Spring 1943 brought thaw to the frozen steppes and renewed German offensives. The Wehrmacht, reeling from defeat at Stalingrad, sought to regain initiative through massive armored pushes. The Night Witches found themselves flying multiple sorties each night, targeting the German supply lines that fed these operations. The Luftwaffe's obsession with destroying the 588th Regiment intensified. German pilots began flying night patrols specifically to hunt the P2s, their commanders offering substantial rewards. The promised Iron Cross for shooting down a night, which became a coveted prize. They hunt us like we're big game, Katia remarked one evening, studying intelligence reports of increased German fighter activity. We should feel flattered. We should feel concerned, Nadia corrected, though she smiled. Over 2 years of combat had forged them into something harder than steel. They no longer flinched at flak or panicked when caught in searchlights. They had become warriors in the truest sense. But the enemy's determination was proving costly. In early April, during a raid on German positions near Kuban, the Night Witches encountered a new German tactic. Fighters equipped with specialized night fighting equipment, waiting along the likely flight paths back to Soviet bases. Irina Sabrova and her navigator Maria were returning from their 5th sortie of the night when a Messerschmitt appeared from the darkness. The first burst of cannon fire shredded their left wing. Irina immediately cut the engine and pushed the P2 into a spin, a maneuver that looked like a fatal crash to the German pilot, who broke off, satisfied with his kill. 200 meters from the ground, Irina pulled out of the spin and restarted the engine. The damaged P2 limped back to base, where Irina landed it despite having minimal control. When asked how she survived, she simply said, "I refuse to give them the satisfaction." The incident led to new tactical discussions. Bershanskaya gathered her squadron commanders to review their approach. The Germans are adapting. We must adapt faster. New routes were planned, varying each night. Planes began flying at even lower altitudes, using terrain to mask their approach. The conveyor belt tactic was refined further, with planes attacking from multiple heights simultaneously, making it harder for fighters to track them all. Nadia proposed a daring innovation, occasionally flying during twilight hours, when the Germans wouldn't expect them and their fighters' night fighting advantages would be negated. The suggestion was risky. Twilight also meant the P2s would be more visible, but it proved effective. The psychological impact of being attacked at unexpected times further eroded German morale. By summer, the reputation of the Night Witches had reached mythical proportions. German soldiers swapped stories of the Nachthexen, embellishing their abilities, turning them into supernatural beings. Some claimed the pilots could see in complete darkness. Others insisted they were protected by witchcraft, that bullets simply passed through them. The truth was both more mundane and more impressive. These were women who had mastered their craft through relentless practice and survived through skill, courage, and teamwork. They weren't witches. They were warriors. But losses continued. Zhenya Rudneva, one of the regiment's most skilled navigators, died when her plane was hit by flak during a particularly heavy raid. Nadia Popova's closest friend, Zoya, crashed during a storm. Her plane found days later in a ravine. Each loss was mourned, but there was no time to grieve properly. The war continued, and with it the missions. The Soviet High Command took notice of the regiment's effectiveness. Stalin himself mentioned them in a speech, calling them defenders of the motherland worthy of the highest honor. Orders and medals began arriving. Order of the Red Banner, Order of the Red Star. Nadia received her first Order of the Red Banner after her 150th mission, though she felt uncomfortable with the ceremony. "Give it to the ground crews," she suggested. "Without them, we'd never leave the ground." As autumn approached and the tide of war began to turn decisively in the Soviet Union's favor, the Night Witches pushed deeper into territory the Germans had held for years. They flew over the Dnieper, over the reclaimed cities of Ukraine, always pressing westward, always striking at the retreating Wehrmacht. The longest night, December 1943, marked a turning point. The Red Army had decisively broken German lines across multiple fronts, and the Wehrmacht was in full retreat. The Night Witches now flew deeper into enemy territory than ever before, striking at supply depots, rail junctions, and command posts far behind what remained of German lines. On the night of December 17th, Nadia received orders for an unusually ambitious mission. A major German supply hub had been identified near Melitopol, heavily defended and considered crucial to the German retreat efforts. The High Command wanted it destroyed. The 588th Regiment was tasked with the operation. Bershanskaya assembled 12 crews for the mission, the largest single-target operation they'd attempted. The intelligence was good, but concerning. 40 anti-aircraft guns surrounded the depot, plus multiple searchlight batteries. German fighters were known to patrol the area. It would be the most dangerous mission yet. "We go in waves," Bershanskaya explained, pointing to maps spread across a makeshift table. "First wave draws their fire and attention. Second wave hits from the west. Third wave from the east while they're repositioning. Fourth wave finishes anything still standing." Nadia would lead the second wave. As she walked to her aircraft that evening, she felt the familiar pre-mission tension. 2 years of combat had taught her to respect this feeling, not fight it. Fear kept you sharp, kept you alive. Katia was already in the navigator's position, checking their maps by flashlight. "Ready for another dance with the devil?" she asked. "Always," Nadia replied, climbing into the pilot's seat. The Patu had been patched so many times it was more repair than original construction, but it flew true. That was all that mattered. The first wave departed at 2,100 hours. Nadia watched their navigation lights disappear into the darkness, then cut out completely as they neared enemy territory. 20 minutes later, distant explosions lit the horizon. The attack had begun. "Second wave, prepare for takeoff." Bershanskaya's voice carried across the field. Nadia's engine coughed to life, the familiar sound somehow comforting. She'd made this flight hundreds of times, but each one felt like the first. That mix of anticipation and dread, the knowledge that she might not return, but the determination to complete the mission regardless. They flew in formation for 30 kilometers, then split up to approach from different angles. Below, the landscape was scarred by war. Destroyed villages, burned forests, cratered fields. This was what they fought to liberate, what gave meaning to their sacrifice. "Target ahead," Katia called. 20 kilometers. Nadia could see it now. Tracers arcing into the sky, searchlights sweeping frantically, explosions as the first wave pressed home their attacks. The Germans were fully alert, throwing up a wall of steel. "Remember," Nadia said to herself, and to Katia, "fast in, fast out. No heroics." But plans rarely survive contact with reality. As they approached, a searchlight caught them earlier than expected. Suddenly, they were flying in a cone of blinding light, tracers converging on their position. Nadia reacted instantly, cutting the engine and dropping into a dive. The P-2 plummeted, the light losing them briefly. She pulled up barely 30 meters above the ground, restarted the engine, and came in beneath the searchlight coverage. "That was close," Katia breathed. "It's about to get closer," Nadia replied. The depot was directly ahead, visible in the light of fires set by earlier attacks. Buildings, vehicles, ammunition stores, all vulnerable targets. She lined up her approach, hands steady despite the chaos around them. Flak burst on all sides, shrapnel rattling against their aircraft like deadly rain. A piece tore through the wing inches from Nadia's head. "Steady," Katia called. "Steady, release." The bombs fell away, and Nadia immediately banked hard left. Behind them, the explosions added to the inferno consuming the depot. But there was no time to celebrate. A German fighter had spotted them. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Messerschmitt had every advantage: speed, firepower, visibility. But Nadia had experience and an aircraft that could turn inside any fighter ever built. She flew through valleys of smoke, around burning buildings, so low that the fighter pilot lost sight of them against the ground clutter. Finally, blessedly, they broke contact and headed for home. The mission had taken 40 minutes. It felt like 40 hours. Back at base, as dawn broke, they counted the cost. 11 crews returned. One did not. But reconnaissance photos taken at first light showed the depot completely destroyed. The German retreat would be delayed by days, perhaps weeks. The mission was deemed a success. Nadia stood beside her bullet-riddled P-2, counting the new holes. 47. Their aircraft was more holes than plane. "Think she'll fly again?" Katia asked, appearing with bandages on her arm, a wound she hadn't mentioned during the flight. "She'd better," Nadia replied. "We have work tomorrow night." Westward to victory. By 1944, the character of the war had fundamentally changed. The Wehrmacht was in retreat across the entire Eastern Front, and the Red Army pressed them relentlessly westward. The Night Witches flew further into formerly occupied territory, witnessing the liberation of cities that had suffered under German rule for years. Nadia would never forget flying over Minsk on the night of its liberation. Below, fire still burned from the fighting, but she could see people emerging from shelters, waving at the Soviet aircraft overhead. It made the sleepless nights and constant danger worthwhile. The regiment's fame had spread far beyond the Soviet Union. Western correspondents, allowed to visit the front for the first time, scrambled to interview these legendary female pilots. One American journalist, watching the Night Witches prepare for a mission, wrote, "These women do casually what many male pilots would consider impossible. They fly aircraft that belong in museums into combat that would terrify veterans. And they do it night after night, with a courage that humbles everyone who meets them." But media attention couldn't protect them from the realities of war. As they pushed into Poland and toward the German border, resistance intensified. The Germans fought with the desperation of men defending their homeland, making every mile costly. In March 1944, tragedy struck close to Nadia's heart. Katia, her navigator for nearly 3 years, was injured during a particularly rough landing. Shrapnel from an exploding bomb, one of their own that had been damaged by flak and detonated on impact, pierced her leg. The wound wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it ended her flying career. Nadia visited her in the hospital, struggling to maintain composure. "We'll fly together again," she said, though both knew it was unlikely. "You'll fly," Katia corrected, gripping Nadia's hand. "That's what matters. Finish what we started." Nadia's new navigator was Olga Samfarova, a quiet woman from Leningrad who had lost her entire family during the siege. She navigated with a precision that bordered on supernatural, seeming to know the location of every German position before intelligence reports confirmed it. Their first mission together was a raid on a German airfield near Lviv. As they approached, Olga suddenly called out, "New flag position for a clock, not on our maps." "How do you know?" Nadia asked, adjusting course. "I can feel it," Olga replied simply. Seconds later, the position opened fire, exactly where she'd indicated. Over the following months, Nadia and Olga became as effective a team as she and Katia had been, though in different ways. They flew through the liberation of Ukraine, the push into Romania, the bloody fighting in Hungary. Each mission brought them closer to Germany itself. The other Night Witches had similar stories. Some had been flying since the regiment's formation. Others were newer, replacements for those lost in combat. All shared the same determination to see the war through to its conclusion. By autumn 1944, they were flying over German soil. The psychology had shifted. They were no longer defending their homeland, but carrying the war to the enemy. The stakes felt both higher and more personal. These are the cities and factories that had produced the weapons used to devastate the Soviet Union. These were the people who had supported Hitler's war of annihilation. Yet Nadia found herself troubled by the destruction. She had seen what happened when bombs fell on populated areas. The fires, the casualties, the lives shattered. War was terrible regardless of which side suffered it. "Does it bother you?" she asked Olga one night, as they prepared for a mission over East Prussia. "What we're doing?" Olga was silent for a moment. "My mother, my father, my 2 sisters, they died during the siege of Leningrad. Starved to death while the Germans sat outside the city and waited. So no, it doesn't bother me. This is justice." Nadia couldn't argue with that logic, but the question remained in her mind. She had killed Germans, hundreds, perhaps thousands, indirectly through her bombing missions. She had done her duty, but she wondered what the cost would be to her soul when the war finally ended, if it ever ended. Sometimes it felt like the flying would continue forever, night after night, mission after mission, until every city in Europe was nothing but rubble. But then came news. The Western Allies had landed in Normandy. Germany now fought on 2 fronts. The end, while not yet visible, was at least conceivable. The night witches flew on. The last flight. April 1945. Berlin was burning, and the Red Army was closing in from all sides. The Third Reich, which Hitler had promised would last 1,000 years, had barely lasted 12. The end was near, and everyone could feel it, a mixture of triumph and exhaustion, of relief and profound weariness. The Night Witches had been flying continuously for nearly 4 years. Of the original crews that had trained at Engels in 1941, fewer than half remained. Some had been killed in combat. Others had been wounded and could no longer fly. A few had been reassigned to other duties. But those who remained had become legends. Nadia had flown 852 missions, a number that would have been unbelievable if the meticulous records didn't prove it. She had been shot down twice, crash-landed 4 times, and collected more medals than she could remember. She had watched friends die and cities burn. She had become, in the words of one German prisoner, the very incarnation of vengeance. But she just felt tired. The final mission came on May 2nd, 1945. Berlin had fallen, Hitler was dead, but scattered German units continued fighting. A Wehrmacht position outside the city was holding up the Soviet advance. The Night Witches were called in one last time. As Nadia walked to her aircraft, she realized this might truly be the end. The war was effectively over. This could be her last combat flight. She felt neither relief nor regret, just a strange numbness, as if her emotions had been worn away by years of stress. Olga climbed into the navigator's position without a word. They had flown together for over a year, through some of the war's deadliest battles, and they communicated now almost without speaking. The mission itself was routine, depressingly, terribly routine. They flew to the target, dropped their bombs, returned to base. No fighters pursued them. The anti-aircraft fire was half-hearted, as if the German gunners knew it was pointless. The war was over in all but official proclamation. Landing at dawn, Nadia sat in her cockpit for a long moment, hands still on the controls. Olga climbed out and walked away without comment, understanding that some moments needed to be faced alone. For years, 852 missions, countless bombs dropped, targets destroyed, enemies killed. And she had survived when so many others had not. Why? What made her special? Nothing, she realized. Just luck, skill, and the stubborn refusal to die. On May 8th, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was assembled for a final formation. They stood in their worn uniforms, these women who had terrorized the Wehrmacht and earned the respect of even their enemies. Many had tears streaming down their faces. Some laughed with relief. All bore the invisible scars of what they had endured. Bershanskia addressed them, her voice strong but heavy with emotion. "You have served the motherland with courage beyond measure. You have proven that women can fight, can fly, can win. The generations that follow will remember what you accomplished here." Marina Raskova, who had formed the regiment, was not present. She had died in a crash in 1943, ironically in non-combat conditions. But her vision had been realized. Women had not just participated in the war, they had excelled at it. Over the following weeks, awards and honors were distributed. 23 night witches received the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. Nadia was among them. She accepted the medal with mixed feelings, pride in what they had accomplished, sorrow for those who hadn't survived to see victory. The regiment was eventually disbanded. The pilots returned to civilian life, though many found the transition difficult. How did you go back to normal after living at the edge of death for 4 years? How did you sleep through a quiet night after hundreds of nights filled with combat? Nadia tried to resume her pre-war life, but it was impossible. She had changed too much. The young woman who had wanted to fly for the joy of it no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, someone who had seen and done things that couldn't be undone or forgotten. She remained in aviation, eventually becoming an instructor, teaching new generations of pilots. Sometimes on quiet nights, she would stand outside and listen to the wind. And for a moment, she would be back in her Patu, Katia behind her, flying through darkness toward an uncertain future. The night witches faded from public memory as the years passed. The Soviet Union, like most nations, was more comfortable celebrating male heroes. The women who had flown those desperate missions became footnotes in official histories. But they never forgot each other. Annual reunions brought surviving night witches together, where they would share stories, remember fallen comrades, and marvel that they had survived it all. They had been through something extraordinary, something that bound them together more tightly than blood. Decades later, near the end of her life, Nadia was asked by a historian if she regretted her time as a night witch. She thought carefully before answering. Regret? No. We did what had to be done. We defended our homeland against invaders who sought to destroy everything we loved. The cost was terrible, in lives, in trauma, in lost years. But I would make the same choice again. What do you want people to remember about the night witches? The historian asked. Nadia smiled, a rare expression on her weathered face. Remember that we were not superhuman. We were just women who refused to accept that there were things we couldn't do. We flew obsolete aircraft against impossible odds because someone had to, and we were willing. Remember our courage. Yes, but remember also our humanity. We were not witches. We were soldiers, and we did our duty. The night witches had terrorized Hitler's armies not through supernatural power, but through skill, determination, and sheer audacity. They proved that courage has no gender, that women could fight as fiercely as any man when defending what they loved. Their legacy endures not in monuments or official histories, but in the example they set, that ordinary people, when called upon, can accomplish extraordinary things. That darkness, however deep, can be overcome by those brave enough to fly into it. The war had made them witches, but it was their humanity, their courage, and their sacrifice that made them heroes. And on quiet nights, when the wind whistles through the trees with a sound like canvas wings cutting through darkness, some say you can still hear them. The night witches, forever young, forever flying, forever free.